Chapter 6. Bill circled Needle Rock, searching, nursing a forlorn hope that the saddle stock had strayed. Daylight had strengthened, and he could now see far out among the hummocky plains. There was no signs at all of the ponies. Reason told him his guess would fail. The animals were hobbled. Unless the hobbles were unbuckled, they could not have strayed. One hobble might break, but not three. Somebody had driven those ponies off. In a flash, the thought of the dude he had driven from camp at gunpoint. This, then, was his revenge. Bitterly, as he trudged back to camp, he damned the visitor and registered a mental vow to even the score. Phyllis was still asleep. Bill eyed the girl gloomily and then checked the water bags. Water was life in the barrens. This done, he rolled a smoke and hunkered down to figure out a course of action. The nearest water was at Coyote Springs, 15 miles across the burning flats. Alone, he could make it. Would he ever reach the spring, though, with a sick girl on his hands? Phyllis Ford's voice roused him out of his gloomy abstraction. She eased up painfully to a sitting position. "Good morning, Bill," she cried with a weary smile. "Oh, I feel like a raw steak after it's been well pounded and fried to a crisp." "Move around a little, ma'am," suggested Bill gravely. "It'll take the soreness out of your joints." With oohs and ouches, the girl struggled to her feet and then hobbled towards him. "What's wrong?" she inquired quickly at the sight of his somber features. "The horse is vamoosed," he said shortly. "But didn't you slip some leather gadgets on their forelegs so they couldn't wander away?" "Some yeller sidewinder hazed him off." The girl's lips tightened at the realization of the predicament that they were in. Sore muscles forgotten, she stepped quickly to his side. "What are we going to do, Bill?" she asked quietly. "I guess we best lag it for Coyote Springs at sundown." "That's an awful long distance to walk," she observed reflectively. "I can't figure no other way." Bill's voice was grim. "We have to get to water." "Shouldn't we start out as quickly as possible?" The rider's leathery features creased humorously. "That sun out there will drive you loco before we cover 5 miles, and we have 15 to go." Phyllis was silent for a space, and then she sat down beside him. "You could make it alone, couldn't you?" "Maybe." "How much water do we have?" 2 bags. "You take one and go back and leave me here. I'll just be a drag, and perhaps we'll both never get out alive." "Ma'am, you're loco." Bill's wide mouth quirked with a familiar grin. "We'll bucket together come sundown, and we'll both make it, yes sirree." He rose jauntily and started to build a fire. Carefully he poured 1 mug of water into the battered coffee pot. Throughout the dreariness of the heat-laden day, they followed the shadow of the Needle Rock as the sun made its circle. When the purple deepened, Bill set to work. He hacked off the high heels of their riding boots with his jackknife, piled the saddlery and dunnage in a niche at the base of the rock. "Best dump that fancy 6-gun, ma'am. We gotta travel light." Phyllis unbuckled the new gun belt and threw it on the pile. Bill added his spurs. He tied the 2 precious water sacks, now half empty, to his belt and slung a gunny sack of food across his shoulder. Sinking behind the distant mountains, the sun threw blood-red streamers across the waste. "Let's go, ma'am," he grunted. For a while, every step was agony as the girl followed the rider's broad figure. And then, gradually, to her grateful surprise, the stiffness wore out of her sore muscles. Darkness closed in, pricked by marauding stars overhead. Steadily, the two worked southward, ascending and descending into a series of low ridges that seemed to wash across their path like the waves of a limitless sea. At the end of an hour, Bill halted and stretched out on a rocky slope. "How you doing, ma'am?" he inquired with a cheerful grin.
"Fine,"
Phyllis said brightly.
"It's easy, now that awful sun is gone."
"We have plenty of miles yet," he warned. The night wore on. They had made 3 hourly stops. The girls' sun-blasted figures were now tight-drawn in pain and fatigue. The terrain they traversed was hard lava, pitted and uneven. Her blistered feet burned in the tight-fitting riding boots. The muscles of her legs throbbed with the unaccustomed effort of climbing endless ridges. Her whole body ached. Their toiling progress was becoming a nightmare. She wanted to scream, to rush into the shadows on either side and thrust them back, to do anything to break the monotony of the eternal plod, the plod, the plod. Then her mood changed, and she fought a compelling impulse to lay down and rest. Visions of soft beds and cool airy rooms, splashing fountains tantalized her. Only the sight of Bill's stocky form plugging stubbornly ahead, and the thought that she was incumbent, kept her limping along in his wake. Bill pulled out his watch and sank down with a grunt of relief. Accustomed to the saddle, he could have ridden all night and thought nothing of it, but leg work was almost as hard upon him as was the girl. His feet felt like balls of fire, and every step was agony. Phyllis dropped slackly beside him. He held out a water bag. "Best take a mouthful." She drank thirstily. The respite ended all too soon. Bill slugged to his feet, slung the bulging gunny sack across his shoulder. The girl tried to rise, but her cramping muscles at last failed to function.
"I just can't, Bill,"
she gasped.
"You go on."
He grasped her under the arms and hoisted her upon her feet. Staggering, she moved along beside him, supported by his arm.
I'm all right now,"
she declared, and shook off the support. The rider's pace was slowing. He could feel the dampness of blood in his boots and his muscles aching like sore teeth. What was the girl suffering, who plugged along so doggedly behind him, he thought somberly. He fumbled for his watch. "Time for another spell," he flung back. How many stops? 4, or was it 5? Hell, they should be nearing the spring by now. Few words were passed between them as they crawled along the forlorn plain. Each sought to conserve strength to the utmost. As the hours dragged by, the girl's faculties began numb. Nothing mattered, save the necessity to keep going on, up and down, on an everlasting treadmill. Bill dumped his gunny sack and dropped to the ground. The girl collapsed wordless beside him. They rested in silence, and once again he heaved up. Phyllis lay inert.
"Leave me here, Bill," she moaned.
Again he set her up on her feet. She swayed and crashed down again. The rider swore softly, knotted the gunny sack to his belt and bent and lifted her limp body with both hands. Unsteadily, clasping her tight upon his chest, he swayed along the trail. Slinking around the rock-girded basins that lay below the springs, the coyotes whiffed man scent and sneaked silently up the gulch. Crouching among the boulders, they watched a thick-set figure struggle out of the darkness, staggering like a drunken man, clasping a limp form in his arms. He laid his burden gently beside a pool and eased off his high-topped riding boots, and with a long-drawn sigh thrust his blooded feet into the cold water. It was daylight when Phyllis awoke. She winced as she endured and tried to sit up. Bill slowly hobbled around, gathering dead wood for the fire.
"Why, we made it."
Her voice was a hoarse croak. "Sure did, ma'am," grinned Bill. "But I gamble my dogs will never be the same again." The girl's brow knit.
"The last thing I remember is falling down. My legs just folded up. You didn't carry me, did you?"
"It wasn't too far," returned the rider gruffly.
"Why, to think I should have been such a weakling."
"You did mighty well, ma'am. I figure we best stick around till some jasper drifts in. We got plenty of feed." Forenoon of the second day, a tall rider approached the springs, trailing 3 ponies. Bill jumped to his feet with a whoop. "Look at that! Pat Stevens, and he's got our horses." The sheriff reined up and cast a sardonic eye on the grinning Bill. "Do you loose herd your saddle stock in the barns?" he inquired politely. "Or are you just a darned all-fired jackass?" Bill fondled the nose of his buckskin. "We had him hobbled at Needle Rock, and some lousy sheep herder loosed him and left us afoot." "So. And we lagged it across Alki Plains. Our feet ain't been through howling yet." "You wouldn't happen to know the gent?" inquired Pat, swinging to the ground. "I got him pegged." Bill's voice was brittle. "A dog-blasted dude who hangs around Danville." "That sounds like Plumford," murmured Pat. "How come he acted that way?" "Guess he went on the prowl after I eased him out of camp under a gun." "Weren't you a mite hasty?" "No," declared Bill. "The hairpin was dogging us. Seemed he set on locating that Mirage mine." Bill rode for Needle Rock with the pack pony to collect the saddles and dunnage. Shortly after sundown he was back. "Say, ma'am," he declared, "your nice new gun belt and that pretty little .38 has done disappeared completely."
"But I'm positive I dropped it on the bedrolls."
Bill shrugged. "Well, it must have slipped down a badger hole." "Well," demanded the sheriff when the 3 relaxed around the campfire after supper, "you pilgrims all set to head for Dutch Springs?" He eyed Phyllis's scorched features and dusty shirt and disc-covered Levi's with a chuckle. "You sure aren't the same girl that come into town, ma'am."
"I've had a plenty of the bairns for one trip," declared Phyllis. "I need to harden up before I tackle that horrible waterless waste again."
She shot a sidelong glance at her guide's rugged features.
"And I doubt if Bill would ever want to be burdened by such a weakling."
"You're dang tootin' he will. There ain't a gal in the valley that's got your sand. No siree."
"Not even Mommy Rakestraw?"
There was a subtle challenge in Phyllis's soft voice. Bill chewed the butt of his cigarette vigorously. "Well, ma'am," he returned defensively, "she's different. She was born on a horse." He turned to the sheriff. "Reckon I better head for Dansville at sunup. Got urgent business there." Shifts were changing at the big smelter when Bill's buckskin jogged into the mining town. Like a stream of ants, men blackened the hillside above town, swarming down to the bars and gambling houses and hotels that were thick packed on each side of the main street. The chunky rider swung down out of the leather outside the wagon wheel. He dropped the reins around the hitching rail, slapped his dusty Stetson against his leg, and pushed eagerly through the bat wings. The wagon wheel was the favorite rendezvous of punchers from ranches around Danville. Several spurred riders were bellied up to the bar. Bill hollered for a bottle. Tiny Manners of the Triple C, an old-timer Bar W hand, drifted across the sanded floor. "Hello there, Tiny," grunted Bill, as he downed 3 fingers and grabbed the bottle to pour again. "Todd's in town, making plenty of war talk." A frown gathered on Bill's brow. He had urgent business in prospect. Now he had Todd. Carefully he trickled out a bare 2 fingers and pulled out his gun, blew out the dust of the action, and twirled the cylinder. Lowering the hammer on an empty chamber, he downed his drink and grinned cheerfully at Tiny, and stepped jauntily towards the bat wings. Before leaving the shelter of the doorway, the rider glanced rapidly up and down the street. Heavy-booted, blue-shirted smelter laborers thronged the plank walk. A gleam leapt into his smoky eyes. Not 50 paces distant, moving towards him with long strides, was the upright figure of the dude. Clad in loose tweeds, he shouldered disdainfully past groups of lounging laborers. Bill waited until his quarry was close, and then steps out into the middle of the plank walk. He saw a recognition register in the dude's cold eyes, but the latter came on with unbroken stride. The Englishman's glance met Bill's, passed through and beyond him. Lean features stiff, he swerved to avoid the chunky figure. "Hold it, mister," grated the rider. "I've been looking for you." "I've no desire to resume our acquaintance," returned Plumford icily. "You were damned uncivil at Needle Rock, so to hell with you, my good friend." Bill stepped close. "Listen," he growled. In an instant the dude galvanized into swift action. He hurled himself like a battering ram at the hunched rider. Taken unawares, Bill lost balance. He fell sideways, cannoning against the hitching rail, and hit the plank walk with the Englishman atop of him. The dust flew from a tangle of flailing legs and arms. As he dropped, fighting to free himself of the Englishman's clinging arms, Bill heard the heavy boom of a .45 behind him, saw the rail splinter above his head where the slug droned past. Like a cat, he twisted free of his assailant and bound to his feet, gun gripping in his fist. But the gunman had disappeared. Slack-jawed with surprise, smelter men were staring around. Bill swung round to the dude. The latter picked himself up and commenced carefully to dusting off his tweeds. "What's the big idea?" snapped the rider. "You should know," returned the Englishman coldly. "A man was aiming a gun at the middle of your back from the alleyway. He was apparently the type of person who incurs an enemy." Bill thrust back his Stetson and ran stubby fingers through his coppery hair in bewilderment. Here he had been all set to clean up this Jasper, and the son of a gun saved his life. "You run off our ponies," he accused. "I certainly did nothing of the kind." The dude straightened his hat and would have passed on, but Bill grabbed his arm and steered him towards the wagon wheel. "Let's have some liquor," he urged. "The drinks are on me, and we'd best be having a chat." At the bar, he returned to the attack. "You claim you never hazed off our saddle stock?" The dude diluted his whiskey with water.
I have not yet sunk to such depths that I would leave a woman afoot in the barrens," he replied with dignity. "I rode back to Coyote Springs, and there I met two prospectors with their pack animals, and we spent the night together."
"What time did you hit the spring?"
The Englishman pondered. "No later than an hour after midnight."
Bill digested his companion's words. The animals were around at 2:20 a.m. when he woke up. The intruder must have been skulking around then. It was a sure thing the dude had no hand in it, if he wasn't lying. He turned again to the cold-eyed Englishman. "Them prospectors wouldn't be around?" The other, smoothing his smudge of a mustache with annoyance.
"Damn it, you're infernally unbelievable. As a matter of fact, I rode into town with them, and they purchased supplies at the Danville Outfitting and Merchandising store."
"Well, I reckon you must be on the level," admitted Bill slowly.
"But damn it, who run off our ponies?" "Perhaps someone who was anxious to discourage you from visiting the Mirage Mine," said Plumford frigidly. "And now, good day, sir. I'm anxious to be playing a little bit of poker."
End of chapter 6.